Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Historical Humans Reacts. And today we are playing Aggravate Justin because we are talking about how federal funding has incentivized institutions to hold on to and, in some cases, even destroy Native American remains. At least that's what a report by ProPublica is stating, which there's a lot to this, and I have some intimate knowledge of institutions, so this will be a great little conversation.
Oh boy.
Oh.
So, to lead into this, since 1990, federal agencies have awarded money to universities and museums for research projects involving Native American cultures. And the argument of this article and of the study behind it is that this funding for the study of Native American cultures has encouraged a lot of these places to ignore NAGPRA, which is the federal law that prohibits the holding on to of certain cultural artifacts and Native American remains.
Yeah, the law itself is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and what it was meant to do, it was meant to serve as a vehicle for tribes to start repatriating or to start having institutions repatriate tribal remains, human remains, and usually artifacts and collections and things back to the groups that they originally belonged to, because a lot of times collections are um, unethically acquired, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there
it
was there was an entire several centuries before ethics was applied to fields like archaeology, wherein anything it was anything goes, and a lot of stuff we have comes from that time period.
and with that is a significant number of human remains. I mean, it is currently estimated that there are about 110,000 indigenous human remains that still to this day are in collections. So that is a large number of remains. And that funding basically would allow researchers to research the remains because there is valuable information that can be detained from human remains. However, there are some cases that are absolutely mind boggling, like 20 years ago, University of Utah anthropology student Joan Brenner Coltrane obtained funding from the National Science Foundation, the NSF, to study human remains at Harvard's Peabody Museum. And her proposal promised that it would undoubtedly influence the institution's repatriation decisions. Didn't know there were much decisions behind that, but it gets even worse. She ended up shattering sections of the human remains, the bones, to study their mitochondrial DNA. And ultimately, the research proved disappointing. It didn't end up with the results that they had hoped. And afterwards, the Harvard Peabody Museum didn't end up repatriating the remains whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah. So the argument of the article is that we give them money to study things, and then they use the guise of studying things as an excuse to damage remains and artifacts, or at the very least, not return them because they're under investigation, even though the federal law should be superseding that by saying it's illegal for you to own it, regardless of whether you are investigating it. Because universities and museums are not law enforcement agencies. They do not have a right to things on the basis of investigation.
Yeah, and it provides an avenue and an offshoot for these institutions and these research bodies to avoid repatriation and to avoid going through that process, losing the collections, deaccessioning the items from their collections. They just don't want to be bothered, or they have some researcher who is thinking about or promising to do this legacy research project. One of the first excavations I was a part of, we were trying to reestablish positive relations with the tribe, and in doing so, we actually decided to repatriate some of their burial goods and remains from Beloit College because that's where the remains had ended up and stayed in their um, repository for 50 plus years.
Yeah, and also too, just if you think that, um, you know, the museums and universities just holding on to these things does no harm, doesn't put them at risk, even if the university isn't actively studying any of them. Um, at my undergrad, one of the things in my biological anthropology courses that we got to see was a box labeled "indeterminate human remains sorted," assorted. Because what had happened was when they were moving from one building to another for the biology labs to be relocated, someone decided to stack several boxes on top of each other, and the bottoms fell out. Mixing all of the human remains together. And there is no unsorting that.
And not only that, but there's also other issues that come up that a lot of tribal nations are truly suffering from, in that a lot of times these institutions will label the remains as culturally ambiguous. They will refuse to put a cultural association on the remains, and in doing so, basically deny any sort of NAGPRA claims, because why would we repatriate these remains to this specific tribe when we don't know who the true ancestry is? And this was all spurned in the 90s with the famous case up in Kennewick, Washington, referred to as Kennewick Man, where these remains were found that were about 9 to 10,000 years old. And 4 different tribal groups all claimed heritage of this man, and in the process of them trying to get the remains repatriated and fighting the legal battle, the scientist who had the body was uncovered by that had custody of it, because the body was found by the Army Corps, but the researchers who had custody of it were doing a bunch of studies and tests on it that the tribes vehemently did not want. And initially, a lot of people may think, like, well, the research is beneficial, it's proof positive. A lot of times, these descendant communities have faced a lot of traumas associated with it, and it becomes a very intimate and problematic topic. So it became a whole battle of them not wanting the research done and trying to find lineage, and the institution refusing to release the remains until lineage could be proven, which you go far enough back, it becomes harder and harder to prove.
Yeah, with something like Kennewick Man, it is entirely plausible that he is a common ancestor of all of the tribes attempting to claim him.
Which is basically what the agreement ended up being.
Yeah, and the thing too is, like, my point is, like, you see there's all these extra layers of problems involved in handling human remains, and there are problems involved even when it's not dealing with specifically NAGPRA and Native American goods. Just the fact that holding them in a box somewhere can still have accidents, incidents, and damage. And when it comes to something that the universities aren't supposed to have in the first place, that really gets messy and irritating. And it is quite a shame that that very logically, federal funding for generating knowledge and preserving knowledge on these tribes is being used to actively harm them.
One of the interesting things that I find is the Department of the Interior is proposing new regulations with regards to NAGPRA. The Secretary of the Interior is a woman by the name of Deb Haaland, who is of indigenous tribal origins. So it's very interesting how she's starting to clean up a lot of these loopholes, which this specific regulation would require researchers to demonstrate them in good faith actually conducting NAGPRA consultations and conversations with tribal groups before they can receive any sort of grant funding, which is huge in the research world. Almost all research is based off of grants.
Yeah, and I think that is something that probably is a bit overdue, because if you can't prove that you are meeting the baseline federal standard that is NAGPRA, then why should you have money to perform research that involves NAGPRA materials?
And it's kind of like an open secret in the field, I guess, that a lot of institutions don't do NAGPRO like they should. It's just not to the level that it should be.
Yeah. You can make a decades long career going into any museum or university that has biological or cultural remains and just attempting to return them to the Native American tribes to which they belong.
AKA, if you're an undergraduate student in anthropology or archaeology and you're looking for a graduate thesis or dissertation topic, congratulations, there you go on a silver platter.
Yeah, for real.
Be smart, do repatriation, don't do what I did, don't do urban design.
And I think that's a great point for us to wrap up. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.